Hello, welcome to video number 8 in the FUME tutorial series, and this time I want to show you how to work with CSV inputs. So the basis for FUME is the JSON expression language, which is based on JSON obviously, and this means that each input needs to be JSON, but for common formats like CSV and HL7v2, FUME has built-in capabilities of transforming them into JSON automatically for you. So if you work in the API, the RESTful API, you would tell FUME to do this automatic conversion by using the content type header. So if you pass a CSV in the body and you put text CSV as the content type, FUME will automatically convert it to JSON and then run the expression against it. When you work in the designer, like we're doing right now, the designer automatically detects that this is a CSV, so you can just work with it as if it was a JSON. So if I put here one of the field names, the field names are from the first row in the CSV, then you get the values that correspond to this field name. If you want to see how the JSON looks, you can press this format JSON, and as you can see, this is an array of objects. Each object has the keys from the first row and the corresponding value. So let's take it back to the CSV format. So the trick with CSVs is that you have the input itself is an array, which is a special case since up until now the input was always an object. So we could write a simple Flash script. It would run once against that object in the input, and that's it. But here we would probably want to run a script for each row. So this will be done by creating a block. First of all, I'm creating a block because I already know that after I will convert each row to a resource, I will also want to put all of those resources inside a bundle. I also happen to know that each row here corresponds to two resources. We have an encounter resource, and we have here a blood pressure measurement, which is an observation resource, the blood pressure profile. So each row is two resources, and I want everything to be inside a bundle. So I already know this will be several scripts wrapped in a block. So the first thing we're going to do in this block will be to create an encounter resource for each row. And since each row comes from the input itself, since the input itself is an array, then as you've seen in previous videos, I will use the $, which represents the context value. So a $, right here at the beginning of the script represents the whole array, and a period after it and a new block means that this block will run for each row, and the context for this block is that specific row. So we'll start by creating an encounter resource. And let's, since we know we're gonna probably need to reference it later, let's put it in a variable. Let's call it encounter, and this will equal a new block, and this block will be the encounter resource template. I can shrink everything since the Flash script has all possible fields and it's very long, and it's handy to make everything folded and open only those that we want to use. We'll start by putting the identifier, which is the visit number here, the value, and we have a visit date time, which will go into the period start. We also have here an is urgent field. We can use that to calculate the class. So a class of encounter can be emergency, which is for those rows that are marked as is urgent equals 1. So we'll take this and say if is urgent equals 1, then we'll put the code for emergency, and if it's not, then it will be ambulatory. We'll use ambulatory as the default value. You will, in a real life scenario, you would want to also put the system here. You will probably want to define that system as an alias and then use it here, but I will not do it in this video since this is not the focus for this one. But we will take the subject, and again, if you've seen our previous videos, then you would know how to find that patient by its business identifier or any other parameters that you may have. You can find it on the server by using the search function. And again, this is not the focus of this video, so we will just take the patient MRN into the identifier value. That would be enough to represent the patient. We have a first name and last name. We can put them in the display. But that's easy enough. Let's do it quickly. And last name. Alright, so now we are in a block that runs for each row. Inside that block, we first create an encounter and put it in a variable called encounter. Now, let's create the blood pressure resource. That's a new block. And we'll put a profile template inside it. Again, I can shrink everything and then open only what I need. So we have a blood pressure here, and we need to split it into systolic and diastolic. So we can do that also, since we're already in a block and we can use several expressions and variables. So that would be the most readable way to do it. Let's first split the blood pressure parts into parts. So let's call it BP parts. That would be equal to split function. We're going to split the field BP on the slash sign. So now we have BP parts, which should be an array where the first element in the array is the systolic value and the second is the diastolic value. So we can use that in the correct slice inside the script. So we'll go to the systolic component, value quantity, and we will put here the first element in BP parts. Then we'll go to the next slice, the diastolic slice, and in the value quantity we'll put the second part. Now, again, we will just use the patient identifier here in order to reference the subject. Let's put it here. And since we don't have a specific daytime for the blood pressure, we will take the visit daytime for it. So effective daytime would be visit daytime. All right, let's have a look, quick look. Yeah, it looks fine. So Now this block created an encounter, but then it creates this BP parts thing, and then it creates the actual blood pressure. So if you've seen the previous videos, you know that each block returns the last expression. What we want to do now is have a single array that has all of those resources, both for each row, both the encounter and the observation. So we can take this array and use it as a context value for the entry element in a bundle. So in the end, we will have a single bundle that has all of those resources. But the tricky part is the reference between the blood pressure and the encounter. When you create a bundle and you want to create references, internal references inside a bundle, you need to use a full URL where if you are not a FHIR server, then that would be UUID, formatted as a URN. And this can be a headache when you need to do it manually, because it's probably a random UUID. You just created it for the creation of the bundle, but you need to use it as an identifier for a resource that you reference. So it becomes a little bit complicated, but FUME helps you with that. Let's see where we need to reference the encounter. I'll take, since we have the encounter in this variable name, I will copy it. Let's see. Okay, this is the encounter. So in the encounter reference, all I need to do is use the function reference and put the encounter in here. Now what FUME is doing in the background is it just generated URN formatted UUID for the encounter. It will be unique for each resource, and it will be the same if it is the same exact resource. So this is an identifier which is sufficient for our use. It's not a random UUID, it is based on the contents of the resource, and later you will see that it is also injected into the bundle in the full URL element. I will show you in a second. So now we have a blood pressure referencing an encounter, and as I said, I want the block to return a single array. So again, the last expression in a block is what the block returns. So I will just create an array and say this array is the encounter and the blood pressure resource. And now we have a single array with, let's check it out. First one is an encounter that corresponds to this first row. Second one is the observation, the blood pressure, that also corresponds to this row. 90 and 60, yep, that's the first row. And let's close it and see the next one. Next one is the next encounter from the next row. So, etc., etc. We have all of the resources in an array. Now, and also we have the reference between each observation and its encounter. So now we will create the bundle. So that block is the first expression now, and we put a semicolon to close it. And now let's create a bundle. Resource template, bundle. Again, I can shrink everything and open only what I want. So in a bundle, we would probably want to define the type. It will usually be something like a transaction or a batch. Let's use a transaction this time. And entries. So I want to use this array that we created here as the context for the entry element. So let's start by creating a variable. We will call it entries. Now we stored the resource arrays in this variable name, and I can use it as a context for the entries. And then for each entry, the resource will equal the context value. So now we've injected the whole resource array into the bundle, and you can now see that the full URL for each encounter is automatically injected here, and it corresponds to the full URL that is used in the reference. So this observation references the encounter using this UUID, and this is the same UID that is in that encounter's entry object. So we have the references, we have a bundle with all of those resources, and the only thing that's left, since this is a transaction, is to define the request. So in the request, we'll put, in the simplest case, that would be a post, but you can of course do some more complex logic here. You can do put, or you can create a condition that posts if some condition is evaluated to true, and puts if that condition is evaluated to false. Just an example, of course. Post, and you need to define the URL, and our URL in a post is equal to the resource type. So that would be pretty easy. I will just put resource type here, since our context is each resource. Then each resource has a resource type, and there you go. So the encounter resource now has a method of post and a URL of encounter, and the observation resource has post and the URL of observation. So now we have a bundle. We can just post to our FHIR server, and it will create all of the encounters and all of the blood pressures, and it will preserve the referential integrity between them. So that would be it for this video. Thank you, and see you next time.